In this video, I'm going to demonstrate a quick and easy way to create some grids and generate some columns and beams. First off, I'm going to go to my Home tab and create grids using the Grid tool. I'm going to generate my first grid that you'll notice is numbered as 1. Now, Revit's going to number everything in a sequential order based on whatever last letter you typed in or left in with the Grid tool. So if I wanted to start off with 1, go back to Modify, select number 1, and use a tool such as Copy or Array, the numbers will automatically increase. 2, 3, 4, and so forth. Now if I go back to the Home tab and use the Grid tool again to start a horizontal grid, Revit's going to think the next number is 5. We can very easily click on the number 5, change that to a letter A, and do the same process again. This time let's try an array. I'm going to select grid A, use the array tool. Now for grids and levels, any kind of a datum object, you don't want to use the group and associate option, so I'm going to uncheck that. Let's say for now I'll create 5 elements in the array, and I'm going to specify the distance between each one, so I'm going to leave it as move to second. I'm going to pick one point it in a direction, in this case downward, and I'll type in a value of 13 space 6, making it 13 foot 6 inches. Hit enter, and we have some grids. That was step 1. Step 2 now is placing some columns. Now, back in our Home tab, on our ribbon we have the column button with a little flyout that has both an architectural column and a structural column. For this purposes, we're going to definitely be using a structural column. The architectural column should really only be used as a so-called shrink wrap for architectural finishes when you have walls that are intersecting columns. Let's go with structural column. We only have a couple of types loaded into this default family project, so we'll stick with what we have. After all, this tutorial is just about placing the columns. And you can very simply place columns at the intersection of grids. That's easy enough. A more flexible and automated way is to use the On Grids option. When you go into this option, you can window around, very much like an AutoCAD selection. I'm selecting right to left, so anything my fence touches, it's going to select. And where I have not placed columns already, it's going to create the columns. You can see a preview of these at the intersection of the grids, and we click Finish Selection. Let's take a look at this in 3D and see what we have so far. Looks pretty good. Now let's go in and add a few beams to this structural framing. I'm going to switch over to my level 2 floor plan. And one thing to note, if you're using Revit architecture, if you want to be placing beams, you want to set the view template to the structural framing plan. This allows the view range to look below the bottom of level 2, which is where the beams are going to be placed. So let's go to the View tab, and let's go to View Templates and say Apply New Template to Current View, and we'll use the default structural framing plan. Let's go back to our Home ribbon, over to Structure, and let's use a simple beam. Now, using a beam, you can draw a beam between points on your grid. That's simple enough. You can sit here all day long and connect the dots. However, again, just the same way we automated the process of placing the columns, I can do the same thing with the On Grids tool. On Grids is expecting a multiple selection. I'll select the end 2 bays. Now notice I have columns 3 and 4, and columns A through E selected. It's not going to generate any beams that are connecting to column grids 1 and 2 in this particular instance. Clicking Finish Selection creates those beams. Let's check it out in 3D. One thing to note, that using the beam tool on grids, it will only create it will only create beams that connect to columns. If the columns didn't connect to that particular level at which you're placing the beams, it wouldn't give you the opportunity to create those things. So for example, these columns only go up to level 2. Here's another tidbit about level of detail in structure. Right now we're seeing simple stick symbols. That's because my plan views and my elevation views are set to coarse by default. If I set them to medium, we'll see the shapes themselves. Now, if I wanted to place beams using that same method at level 3, I wouldn't be able to do that using that pick grids method. Let's try that. Level 3 plan. Let's set our structural framing template. And let's try the beam tool. From the home ribbon, beam, on grids, we'll select all the grids and click Finish Selection. We get a warning saying no beams were added. Again, cannot place the beams using the grid selection if the columns aren't there to support them.